Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You'll hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
Well, welcome back to the Rural Scoop. I am excited about today's conversation. We have a triad of exceptional educators from North Dakota. And North Dakota is one of those places where small schools isn't the exception. They are the backbone of what's happening in rural education there. So today I'm joined by three leaders from the North Dakota Small Organized Schools, or NDSOS. First, we have Mike Heilman, who's the current executive director, who's been in the seat and knows the day-to-day realities that members are living. We also have Mike Bitz, the incoming executive director, who's stepping into the next chapter of leadership and strategy for NDSOS. And then we finally have our current board president of NDSOS, Brandt Dick, who is bringing the governance lens and the board's long view on what districts in that state need to stay strong. So in this episode, we're going to talk about what NDSOS actually does, what rural leaders in North Dakota are facing right now, and how priorities are set at the legislature. And then I hope that we get a chance to get into how this leadership transition is going to strengthen the work in the state at NDSOS moving forward. So let's get to it. Well, welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for being here. And before we dive into policy, I'd really like to ensure that we get a chance to know who you are and what brought you into the work of supporting small schools. So, Mike Heilman, I'm going to start with you. What was the thing that got you into the seat that you're occupying currently?
Well, I grew up in a rural area, grew up on a farm, went to a small two-room elementary school, graduated from a high school with, at that time was actually a fairly good high school, but a fairly large high school, rugby high school, about 100 students in my graduating class after coming out of a little school at Knox. Became an ag teacher, worked through the administrative ranks, retired from school administration in the largest district in the state, and then was asked by the North Dakota Small Organized School Board when I retired if I had any interest in serving as an executive director. And I was looking for something to do, and it felt like a really good fit. I'd been in small schools, I'd been in larger schools as a school administrator. I had a passion for working with some of the smaller schools that I was working at as a county soup, and thought this would really be a good opportunity to continue to serve in that capacity. So I thank the board for, I believe 6 years ago, Brant, that I was asked to consider the position and was lucky enough to land that position.
Fantastic. Well, let's move right into Brant. What about you? What brought you to the work of supporting small schools?
Yes, thank you. So similarly, I grew up in a small community, small school that actually had a K-12 experience at the Munich Public School, and my graduating class was a class of 5. And I always joke it was actually 3 students, but we recruited 2 students to come play basketball for us as high schoolers. We were a really small school. And they continue to be in existence. They've continued to be a good quality school. In fact, Munich was identified as the top 10% of schools in the state of North Dakota. My alma mater, I want to put a shout out to them. But I just got involved with small rural schools. My superintendent experience has been with rural schools, and I got active in the legislative process with advocating for my schools. And so that's how I first got part of small organized schools. Someone asked me to serve on the board, and then eventually the board president retired, and then they asked me to consider serving in that position. And I've been in that position for, I don't even remember how many years, but several years, and just really have a special place. I agree with you, what you said before. in North Dakota, rural schools are the backbone, and we want to really bring that story to the state legislation every 2 years when they meet, and make sure that we take that into consideration as we think about good policy for our state.
Yeah, good point. Mike Bitz, what about you?
I'm going to echo what Brant and Mike both told you. I grew up in a small town, Napoleon. I graduated with 41, but relatively a small school, and great experience there, and nothing but good things to say about Napoleon. Again, that still exists, and I have nieces and nephews that attend school down there. Spent 38 years in education all over the state, small schools. Every school that I worked in was a member of the small organized schools. And I guess after 38 years in education, I'm going to retire. I'm in Mandan, which is right next to Bismarck. So I'm spend a lot of time at the legislature when they're in session, and want to go there and advocate for our North Dakota small schools and public education, and I guess make them try to improve the circumstances in which they have to work.
Yeah, that's such important work. And I appreciate that, because it is certainly one of the things that as a rural superintendent, you may not know that you're going to be the chief advocate for the district, but you certainly are. Mike Heilman, what's one lesson from this role that you wish every lawmaker understood?
One lesson. What I would say is the one lesson is that whether you are in a large school, or in this case in a rural school, in a small school, all of those children deserve a quality education. And our rural schools do an excellent job of educating kids, and they need to be supported at a level so that they can continue to do that. And what I've seen with our small schools, many of them, and Brant mentioned Munich being in the top 10%, many of our small schools are actually in the upper level of performance when you look at the state assessments. So many of our small schools are really doing an excellent job, and the people in those communities are very passionate about keeping their schools open. And they have the right to do that. Sometimes I'm asked, does this small school need to exist? Does that small school need to exist? And my answer always is that's not for me to decide. The decision for that rests with that school board that's been elected in that small community, and the people in that community, if they want to support and keep that school open. I understand that may come with funding difficulties, and we work with the state to do the best we can in those circumstances. And then if that community wants to put extra money into it, that's up to them. So the decisions as to whether small schools, particularly real small schools, continue to exist or not, rests with the districts. And the quality of education that generally is happening there is outstanding.
Yeah. It's such an important thing for them to hear, and I'm glad that you're bringing that message. Mike Bitz, what is a leadership strength that you're bringing into the new seat that you're going to be occupying on day one? I know that there, as a superintendent, there are a lot of things that you could pull from, but what's the thing that you are really looking forward to bringing to the organization?
I've spent a lot of time at the legislature, and I think I've built some relationships there. And it's a tough sell. North Dakota is becoming more urban, our legislature. And I just hope that we can use those relationships to say that the state has an obligation to educate all children, regardless of where they live. Sometimes the economies of scales put some challenges on our small schools, and the state needs to enact some legislation and do some things that allow our small schools to succeed.
Yeah. And if they're not paying attention to it, it certainly is something that needs to be in front of them on a pretty regular basis, even if they only
it is.
It
costs our small. Oops, excuse me about that. It costs our small schools more to educate students per capita, just because they don't have the economies of scale. And sometimes if you just look at the numbers, you don't understand that. But I think you have to look beyond that and say, we have an obligation to educate all students.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Brant, I have been a board president of a state association, and I know the kind of time that you invest in it. So what convinced you that the NDSOS board presidency was something that you really needed to invest your time in?
That's a great question, and I think it's a matter of making sure that our story is told, making sure our story is told at the legislation session with other schools. I've been fortunate enough to be looked at as someone in our state that has an understanding of the funding formula, financial. I was a math teacher. That was my trade before I got into administration. And so with that, I just thought it would be good to be able to be in a position where I could advocate for small schools, because like Mike Bitz talked about, the economy of scales isn't there for small schools. Mm-hmm. And the funding formula has these factors, and there's a lot of moving pieces, and it was good to be able to be in a position where I could communicate that and build those relationships, not only with legislators, but with school leaders. I would say every week, or at least for sure every couple of weeks, I get a call or a text from a school administrator. I won again this morning. What is this? How can we do this? Or what are your thoughts on this? So that's what I feel. I enjoy that, and I want to help. I want to be able to communicate and help schools, and then be able to tell that story to legislators as well, to make sure that they take those things into consideration.
Yeah, well said. So to that end, let's talk a little bit about what NDSOS is, especially for our listeners outside of North Dakota. What is it that you do for your member districts? And I'll open the floor to anyone that has something that they want to make sure is being brought up in the conversation.
Well, I think I can start, and then we can let Brant and Mike, both who have been at member schools at one time or another. I think first and foremost is probably the legislative process and lobbying at a legislative level, to the point of becoming well known enough over time. And I think the organization started back maybe in the 1980s. Am I right about that, Brant? I think that's about the time it got going, and have gone through now probably 5 executive directors, 4 or 5. I think Dr. Bitz might be the 5th one. I'm not sure I'm entirely accurate. And it's kind of evolved. I think there were some purchasing things that were going on at the beginning, getting small schools together to give them an advantage so they could purchase in volume. We've done some things with some bus driver training. We are kind of the transportation people when it comes to legislation. People look at NDSOS because our rural schools have significant transportation budgets. Yeah. And so they look for us to help lobby and develop legislation for transportation reimbursements for schools. That's turned into also helping schools get bus drivers licensed through some program agreements we have with like video providers that will provide the training that our bus drivers need. And if you're an NDSOS member, you get that at a significant discount. The other thing we partner with is the North Dakota Center for Distance Education. That's a really important partnership for us, because many of our small schools may not have the elective courses. And as of maybe the last 4 or 5 years, even teachers for required courses, so they access at a discounted rate coursework through the North Dakota Center for Distance Ed. And, so those are a few of the things we do during the legislative sessions, and Dr. Bitz is going to find out, and Brant also lobbies. We're pretty active lobbying on legislation. And I think we've been key players in helping develop, Brant mentioned the funding formula, key players, and we're invited to interim committee meetings to help develop and propose legislation in the area of transportation and funding and school requirements and all of the various legislation that impacts schools. I think that's kind of the focus for the most part.
Mm.
And I would just add to that, over the years, North Dakota Small Organized School now has a consideration or a seat. For instance, we have a K-12 Coordination Council, which brings together all the education entities together. And so I've had the privilege and to serve on behalf of North Dakota Small Organized Schools to talk about, K-12 education in Coordination Council. And so those are the other aspects that, maybe we don't communicate as well as, or I don't communicate as well as maybe we should, but having those opportunities, I know Mr. Heilman has served on many committees at the state level, and Dr. Bitz as well as again, to make sure that we don't, that we have that opportunity to make sure our considerations are taken into place, because it is different. A Mandan compared to a Manning, there's a difference between those two schools, and how we make sure that those are taken into consideration.
And I would just pile on to what both Mike and Brant said. When I was farther away from Bismarck, our state capital, and I was a member school, sometimes job responsibilities at home and miles to Bismarck kept me from being as involved as I would like to be. But it was nice to have a representative lobbying on our behalf, sending out updates, giving me talking points that I could use when I email my legislators when they're home on weekends, and talk to them about just kind of to have some boots on the ground in the Capitol that could communicate back to me some of the key issues, some of the things that I could do just from a distance to help lobby. I mean, ideally, they would all come to Bismarck and be there and be able to lobby, but sometimes the work back home and the miles involved doesn't allow for that.
Mm-hmm.
Plus the winters in North Dakota, sometimes it's just hard to get to Bismarck.
Yeah.
That is
fair
enough.
Yeah. I wouldn't drive in it, but, I'm an Arizona girl, so what do I know? Brant, you mentioned a phone call that you got from a superintendent this morning, and I think that's important, and it goes to show that people rely on you for information. What are the calls that you're getting right now from superintendents?
Great question. So the call this morning, or the text this morning, was about transportation, and we just transitioned to a new transportation formula I had the privilege of being a part of, and so they're asking, what that means for future. I get calls all the time about, our legislative passed a bill that you're limited to 3% growth as far as your budgets, and what does that mean? I get a lot of calls, schools that are asking about. They may not have had a building fund in the past, and their facilities are getting much older, and now they need to consider that. And I've had quite a few calls, and how do you start one? And what does that mean? What kind of considerations? How do I answer this patron that says, use a mill levy, but really that's going to go up as valuations go up? And so those are the type of calls I get quite often on funding, what are the formula, and those type of things. I mean, our governor has made it clear in his budget presentation to agencies right now with our future. It looks like as of right now, schools can be considered to be held flat over the next 2 years per pupil funding, and that's a concern. The small schools, I mean, expenditures keep going up, but yet state is flat, and so how do you make that work? And so those are the type of questions that I get.
Yeah. What do you think North Dakota does better than other states because of the schools that you have that are small?
I think one of the nice things about North Dakota is we have 165 school districts, operating school districts now, I believe, is just the way we support each other. I know Brant talks about getting texts and phone calls from administrators, and I sometimes call Brant, I sometimes call Mike, and they call me, and we just have a great network across the state. We talk to our young administrators who are just getting in. We reach out to them and tell them there's no such thing as a dumb question. Don't be afraid to ask. I have an app on my phone where I help mentor young superintendents. They can put any question in, and sometimes I'll see Brant will jump in before I can. And we respond to them and just support them. Not that we're experts or anything, but sometimes we've been through something or have a different point of view on it, and can help them get through it. So I think it's just the support that we give each other, and we know that we're all in this together. And we might compete in the gym or on the field, but when somebody asks for help, we're all there to support them.
Yeah.
I would say one thing that North Dakota does well is we have high expectations. Education is all about you get what you expect. And I think North Dakota does have high expectations of our K-12 education. And sometimes it seems like our schools are doing well because of the high bar that we have set. But nationally and so forth, our state does do well in education as far as some of the testing. And again, it's because we have high expectations of our schools, of our students, of our teachers, of our staff. And I think that's something that North Dakota does well.
I would just add that sense of community that exists in North Dakota is almost statewide. And so not only do our administrators communicate well with one another, and that goes from large to small. Small school superintendents are calling Dr. Bitz. They're calling me. Large school superintendents are calling small school, and vice versa. And they really share that because it is kind of just kind of one big family. The other part of that family has become more legislative involvement. We know our legislators, they know us in our communities. Our legislators reach out to our schools to get information before they are, voting on legislation, and our administrators through the North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders, through North Dakota Small Organized Schools, through the School Boards Association, our administrators definitely reach out to our legislators and try to keep them informed. Do we always agree? No, but for the most part, our legislation supports strong public schools, and we all work to continue that.
That's fantastic and unusual. So I think that is a strength of the state for sure. What are the pressures that your member schools are feeling right now, and how are those things showing up in the day-to-day operations of a district?
Well, I'll let the other two gentlemen who work a little closer in districts maybe expound on a couple of things. One of the things certainly is teacher shortage, which is now actually kind of manifesting itself as administrative shortages also. I do some work helping schools, and Dr. Bitz does also with their superintendent searches. And we've got great superintendent candidates out there. We just don't have very many of them. The pool is really decreasing, and I think that's directly related to even the teacher pool becoming tighter and tighter. So I'm really concerned about that. Budgeting is an issue when you are capped at a 3% increase in your health insurance, and inflationary costs are greater than that, and you're expected to hand out raises to employees. Those things are going to be an issue also. Those are probably two of the big ones. We've got some data migration that's happening in North Dakota right now, going to a different platform. But the other two gentlemen with us today can probably address that in more detail than I can.
Yeah, Mike hit them. I mean, the teacher shortage and administrator shortage is huge. And then I think also what you said, Mike, when health insurance costs are rising, the state's capping us at 3%. The way our funding formula works, students are money. And when you lose students, you lose money. And it's the math doesn't work. You're not able to give raises. You're not able to sustain what you're doing. So that there's some real challenges there. And hopefully we can work with our legislator and find some creative solutions that allow our rural schools to be able to offer their employees fair raises and continue to operate as they are.
Yeah.
And I'll piggyback off that. A lot of almost all of our schools are K-12 schools. Not all of them, but most of them are. And so as a K-12 school, when you lose students, you lose that funding. It's hard to adjust. I mean, and I've been working with a school district that have seen, 30 kids they've lost over the last 5 years. And those 30 kids aren't coming from, families, some families have moved, so on and so forth. And so you can't make adjustments, but the way our funding formula is, those 30 kids would generate close to, $400 and some $1,000. Well, that makes it very difficult, puts a lot of pressure on rural schools for their budgets when you lose students. And so that's been a challenge for schools and school leaders and boards to understand the challenge of how do you continue maybe some of the programs you've had in the past. And then it's kind of a catch-22, because if you cut programs right now, those parents might say, you know what, I'm going to homeschool, or I'm going to try something else. And so those are some of the pressures, to your point, the pressures that rural schools are facing, right?
Yeah. That leads me to my next thought about, setting priorities as an organization, because there are a lot of things that leaders are dealing with. And you've mentioned just a few of them. I know that there are more. Can you walk us through how NDSOS sets priorities? I mean, how does the board decide what to push or what to watch, when to jump into the fray and really hammer on something to be done or not done? How does that work?
I should have grabbed our strategic plan. We did some work a couple of years ago with the board on a strategic plan and identified some of those areas that we should work on. And we've actually made some progress in those. One of them was the teacher shortage piece, was critical in rural areas. So I had this conversation and actually brought together rural administrators and said, okay, how do we address this? What can we as an organization do? The result of that, a couple things have happened. There's a private university in Bismarck, the University of Mary. They met with a group of our rural administrators and developed a para to teacher pipeline. And that has happened in other teacher universities now also, where I think some of the work that was started at Valley City State, now at University of Mary, Dickinson State's doing more of this, Bismarck State College. Recently, we became a part of a group called BILT, Business and Industry Leader Technology, or Leaders in Technology, I think it is. But we are working to develop systems and programming that will make it easier for people to, maybe they have a degree, to transition into education, or that make it just easier for them to get the degree and maintain working because they've got kids at home, or they can't leave their current position and lose that income and go to college. So that was one of the strategic things that we looked at. I don't have the plan in front of me. I don't remember that, but that was a key one, was doing that. And then looking at other services we can possibly provide our membership beyond what we do.
And I'll piggyback off that. I'll mention Minot State because my oldest daughter, was a para to teacher position. She actually, right out of high school, she got in this program, and because I kind of knew a little bit about it, and it was a great way. And she's now a teacher in one of the high schools, a part of the largest district in the state. But this was a great opportunity for her, and she's done really well with that. So. Going back to your question, how do you set priorities? And then it kind of goes back to what Dr. Bitz had talked about, is that since we are so working together, we always try to also be in contact and have an understanding of what's the North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders, ND United, School Boards Association. We try to be in as much as we can in communication and working with them, because really, the last couple of years, there's been an attack on public schools, and it's not just North Dakota. I know it's rural, it's schools, public schools across the nation. But we really want to say there is value in public schools, and that's why a lot of times our priorities are set about how can we make sure that we tell the story and have the good things that are happening in public schools in North Dakota get communicated out, and to realize that there is value in rural education in North Dakota, in public schools in North Dakota. And some of the things that people hear and say, litter boxes, that's not happening, but that's, people just jump on those things. Yep. And you think that's happening in all public schools in North Dakota. No, it's,
and ditto to what Mike and Brant both said, but North Dakota is a little bit unique in that every bill gets a committee hearing and every bill gets a floor vote in the state, which That doesn't happen everywhere. I think last session there were over 200 bills, or right at 200 bills, that dealt with education. And I think we lose our effectiveness if we try to speak at all of them. Your voices, they just get tired of hearing your voice and you're like crying into the wind. But I think if we pick our priorities, we talk about teacher retention and recruitment. We talk about the bills where that directly impact our rural schools, and we prioritize funding and getting quality staff in our buildings. I think that makes us more effective than speaking out on 200 bills, some of which have no chance of passing.
Yeah.
If I could just piggyback on what Dr. Bitz just said, an example of that would have been a session, or maybe it wasn't last session, the session before, a bill that wanted to reduce the number of superintendents in the state based on population of schools. And again, we don't show up at every bill because some of them we probably don't need to. But on that bill, we filled that room. It took a couple of phone calls, and we filled that room with not only just small school superintendents, but large school superintendents who know what the difference is. Dr. Bitz is in a fairly large school right now, and he has a supporting cast that doesn't exist in a smaller school district, because that superintendent and maybe the principals also in those small schools, they wear so many hats. They're transportation directors. They are curriculum directors. They are instructional strategists. They are all of those things, playground supervisors, lunchroom workers. They drive the buses, all of those things. And sometimes they don't understand that, and they think there's a cost savings there. But what we can point out is there's a cost savings in the way they do the work in that small school, because we're not hiring multiple people to do this. They do that work. And our legislators listen to that. And there's 164 operating school districts in the state right now, I believe. And the vast majority of them, close to 150, are NDSOS members. And they're also NDCL people, and they belong to the School Boards Association. So we work with the same group of folks to get our message out, whether it's large or small. And one of the beauties of North Dakota is whether you're large or small, for the most part, we support one another.
Speaking to that, one of the school districts that I'm familiar with, because the superintendent sits actually on the NREA executive board, and that's Fort Ransom. And it right now is going through a consolidation and restructuring. And I'm sure that there are other schools that are destabilized for a variety of reasons, but I would assume that most of it comes down to funding, whether it's, a loss of enrollment that has an impact on the school's budget or those kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as the issues around closures and consolidations in your state, and what NDSOS is doing to ensure if there is a closure that has to happen or a consolidation that has to happen, at least it's done well?
I can just jump in and start here. I think our position is that it should always be a local decision when that needs to happen, that it shouldn't be mandated from Bismarck, what happens 150, 200 miles away, that it should be a local decision when that happens. And I think the local, they have a process that you have to go through, whether you want to have a year of not operating or whether you want to dissolve, whether you want to cooperate. I think that's laid out well, the path that you have to take. But I just think our talking point or our position is that it has to be a local decision, and it shouldn't be mandated from Bismarck.
Yeah, and I'll this year, part of my work with one of the schools that is in our agency, I had to have some good discussions with that board, because there comes a point when you have, they were down to 18 kids, K-12. And so it was tough decisions, and you're right, it came down to resources and because there were funding formula and so forth, and they have to face the reality of, can we move forward with these number of students? And then families already were making some decisions of sending their kids to other places, because you get to a point where it gets so small that it does affect the quality of education. And with the shortage of teachers, I know another school district that before they closed, their whole teaching staff was from another country. They could not find teachers from the local area. And so, those are the type of decisions that we support and understand. But to Dr. Bitz's remarks, absolutely, it has to be that local school district, that local community that makes a decision. It should be that the state. I mean, I know some states have said, once you get so small, we're not, and we push back against her really hard, because it should be that local community that makes that decision.
The only thing I would add to that conversation is there are times when an elementary might be a viable choice, and that's difficult in North Dakota because you need to be attached to a high school district. So if you're going to close and you're going to keep an elementary open, you may be able to do that. You may not, depending on how you write a plan, if it's cooperative agreement, and some of those types of things. So there might be those opportunities to do that. But because our funding formula is so directly linked to student numbers, it is student numbers that are going to dictate that, along with teacher shortages that are probably going to dictate that to communities. And I think the important message that we can help with districts is to say, it is the quality of education that you are providing your children as your district gets very, very small. Is it what you want? Is it what you want? And is it what these kids deserve? And at some point, you may need to look to your neighboring districts to say, we can do better by our children by sending them to a slightly larger district. Yeah. Transportation is always an issue, but we can work those things out. So I think our people are pretty thoughtful about that process.
Let's dive a little bit into transportation, because you are certainly a state where transportation is a big deal to your districts and their budgets. And rural districts really do carry the cost of transportation in a way that's just different where you are. Can you explain the rural cost curve that superintendents are dealing with, and their governing boards obviously are dealing with? I mean, I don't want it. I know that it can be something that around the water cooler sounds like complaining. It's certainly not, because it is something that is such an integral part of schooling in North Dakota.
So we just went through a change in our transportation funding formula. I'm going to hand this off real quick. But we happen to have a superintendent that did their dissertation on transportation funding. And we also had gentlemen like are here with me today, Brant and Mike, that are pretty good with those pieces. Brant was integral in the development of our new formula that was designed to look at more than just a reimbursement on a block grant. So I'm going to hand it off to those two to go a little more in depth with that.
And I can talk about that. So we wanted to take, based on the dissertation of the superintendent that Mike was talking about, we wanted to take into account the miles and the size of the school district, land size. So those are factors that we take into consideration with the formula. And really, the formula that we transition to is a first step. We want to be able to, at some point, hopefully try to dig into, to your point, the curve for rural schools. The challenge is, what it comes down to is the type of miles that these buses have to travel. I mean, many of our districts have tons of gravel roads, and the buses, when you drive a bus on a gravel road compared to a paved road, there is a great difference in how long that bus is going to be in service. And so that's our next iteration of our transportation formula that we want to look at. We're not quite there yet, but take into account, can we gain how many miles are driven on gravel roads, and because it does make a huge difference in the longevity of those vehicles and so forth. Yeah.
And I'll just echo what both of these gentlemen said. It's rural schools spend more money trying to get their kids to school than urban students do. And with a limited budget, when you're spending your money on transportation before you even start the education process, that's just a real disadvantage. And they're starting from that point before they even begin.
And I'll throw in the other thing that we talked about, teacher shortage, but bus driver shortage is a real thing too. We because of the requirements and And it used to be that you could get farmers, that was kind of their off time. And now with the change in agriculture and so forth, they don't have the off time. Farmers are busy hauling grain and getting ready for the next year and getting their equipment, ready for the next year. And so it's been a challenge, and rural areas just don't have as many people that are willing and able to drive bus morning and afternoon. I mean, it really cuts in their days. And so that's been a real challenge as well to find. And that's not just a rural school. I mean, larger schools have the same issue trying to find bus drivers and workforce shortage as well. But that has been and continues to be an issue in schools as well.
Yeah.
And just to give you an idea, Melissa, we have school districts, their transportation budget, larger districts is 5% or less of their budget, maybe even less than 1% of their budget. But we have rural districts where it's up to 20% of their budget is transportation. So a huge difference.
Yeah, that is a huge swing in terms of what the budget capacity that you're able to operate for your other programming looks like. I want to shift just a minute and talk about something that is part of the national conversation around rural schools, and that's that dollars leaving public schools and the reality of that. And in a state like North Dakota, where you've got distance and limited alternatives, what do proposals that shift public dollars to private options mean for rural communities in your state?
Well, they're pretty significant. So, and we'll let Brant start this one.
I was just going to say, start in the sense of, and that was the story we shared. I mean, 90% all but the largest 8 school district, how many ever school district, they don't have a choice. They don't have a private school within, 40, 50 miles. And so divert public dollars to private schools, it's really diverting from the rural to the larger communities. And so that's a story that we made sure we told. And it's really true because there aren't those options in the vast majority of those 164 school districts, there isn't the private school option.
And I would just say that private schools have been getting public dollars for many, many years. Federally, they can participate in the National School Lunch Program. They get special ed services, Title I services. But the federal government, when they does that, they still follow the exact same rules. Some of the bills that we looked at in North Dakota, it was diverting public dollars to private schools, but not applying those rules. And that doesn't make fiscal sense. That's not the way things should work. When you take the money, as Mike Heilman always says, when you take the shekels, you get the shackles. The rules come along with the dollars.
Yeah.
Our federal government does that, and if our state wants to do it, it has to be the same rules.
And interestingly enough, all of these things are presented generally as choice, school choice. And unless you truly offer choice to all, then I don't know how you can do that. And along with choice should also come that responsibility to be accountable for the dollars that you're receiving, as Dr. Bitz said. And we have been pretty successful in saying, because choice is limited in North Dakota, as Brant pointed out, then it's pretty difficult to ask rural communities, rural folks to pay taxes that are going to be paid for school choice when they have no choice. Mm-hmm. So, and our legislators, for the most part, have seen that, but it's becoming more difficult. Our governor vetoed a bill that was in that vein, but it will be a constant fight. So far, we've been winning. It's going to become more and more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about, Mike, guardrails that you'd insist on if these policies do end up moving forward?
Boy, I'm going to defer to Brant and maybe to Mike Bitz while I think about that one. I think that maybe one of the guardrails that has to be in place is what Dr. Bitz had mentioned earlier. If you are going to get public dollars, you must be accountable for those dollars like everyone else that gets those dollars.
and I'll say one of the guardrails that and I've testified this. I have a great niece that whose parents there's a lot of resources that go into her education, special needs, and so that is, to me, that's a guardrail. If we're going to open this up where public dollars go to private students, it has to be for any student, for all students. And again, that's because those families can be in rural North Dakota, and those public schools are accepting and say, yep, those are our kids, we're going to educate them. Private schools can say no to those kids. So a guardrail is that has to be for every student.
Yeah, choice has to be choice for all. And if you take public dollars, you're accountable to the public. And just you follow the exact same rules as we do. And if those rules aren't important, get rid of them for us as well in the public school.
Yeah, well said.
We've actually testified in support of money to go to for private education as long as they play by the same rules we play by. You must take all kids. You must be accountable. You must open your meetings, open record laws. All of those things that apply to public institutions then apply to you. And our argument has been, you're no longer private. Embrace being private and stay private.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. And I think that sentiment is reflected in other states as well. So let's take a look at this leadership transition that is happening here very shortly. With Mike Bitz stepping in, what should members of NDSOS expect to stay the same, and where might you evolve in this next chapter of the organization?
Well, I'll start by saying I think you're going to see a lot of the same in the sense of Mike Heilman has already been including Dr. Bitz, in conversations like this and other conversations, and so that transition is already taking place, and I think you can expect a lot of the good work that's been done will continue, and I don't see a lot of that transition concern that way. In fact, in some ways, I think Dr. Bitz will be able to take it and move forward, to take the baton and move forward in a great way. And so I think small organized schools can feel comfort in knowing that we have a person that's going to do good work for us. And I completely believe that.
No, I was handed an organization that was in very good shape, that had a very respected executive director in Elroy Berkeley when it came to me. And I think that I think people would say that we continued that growth and evolution of North Dakota small organized schools, maybe to another level. And I certainly see Dr. Bitz, with the way he is connected throughout the state and with the knowledge that he has of large and small schools, I see that evolution continuing. There are things we need to work on that probably can take another step. Maybe the increase or looking for a way to deal with our teacher shortages, maybe increasing some of the services that small organized schools are there. I think what we have in place is in good shape, and I see Dr. Bitz taking it again to another level.
And I would just say I have a ton to learn, but I know that Mike and Brant are going to answer the phone if I call them or text them, and they're going to help me. We have members in 145. We have members in 145 school districts that are going to help educate me and tell me what they need. And I think if I listen and take direction from the field, we're going to be just fine.
For those viewers that are not watching the video, they were shaking their heads. So I think we have a very close-knit community of leaders in this organization. But looking ahead then, what do you see coming that could potentially reshape small schools in the next 1 or 2 years that you're preparing for at this time? I mean, with the crystal ball that we all have, right?
I think we've hit it several times. I think it's going to be the teacher shortage is going to make it really challenging for some of our small schools to continue to offer quality programming. And I think financially, when our governor's talking about keeping education flat and no increase for education. That's a real challenge when you're trying to offer health insurance, when you're trying to give your employees a raise. I mean, I think that those are the things that we have to advocate for, and we have to say that that's not doable. We're going to need an increase, and try to work with our legislators to help them set their priorities. Education is one of the things in the Constitution that they're responsible for, and there's a lot of things that they fund that they don't have a constitutional responsibility for. So I think we need to make that clear and try to help them get focused on what their actual responsibilities are. We're in need, and there's a lot of wants.
Within the next year or two, you know, our teacher retirement fund had a change where it used to be a rule of 85, you could retire, and then it changed to rule 90. And so in that transition, we had about a 3-year window of which these people, our teachers in the state, were continuing to teach until, instead of hitting the rule of 85, the rule of 90. And then that's going to, in the next year or two, those teachers are going to hit the rule of 90 now at the age of 60. And that's what the change. You have to wait till you turn 60. And so that is going to be a huge issue as these teachers retire. How are you going to fill those positions? And you know, how are you going to find the quality educators? Because we know education, the teachers are an important aspect of, well, probably the most important in a lot of ways, of the teacher in front of the classroom. And if you don't have good teachers in front of a classroom, no matter where you're at, education is going to suffer. And so that is going to be a huge for us in the next year or two.
I think they hit the nail on the head. I think those are the issues. And maybe the one other issue is, especially in our rural areas, as we have fewer landowners that are associated with the property tax. And if we're gonna cap funding levels at the state to a certain dollar amount, and then if we're gonna ask school districts to go out and ask their patrons then, or stakeholders, to provide that support, especially in some of our rural areas, there's fewer and fewer landowners that then share the burden of those increased taxes. And I think that's made it difficult. When we were looking at farms that were 400, 800 acres, now you're looking at farms that are 5,000, 10,000 acres. Huh. There's fewer folks out there, individuals, that are now being asked to pay the price if it's property tax based. Our state is really working hard at kind of eliminating the property tax, but then that puts all the onus on student numbers, and it's a catch-22.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. And to that point, I have a brother that's a county commissioner, and he drove around and he saw 26 farmsteads that were no longer people live there, were there when he was in school, 40 years ago. I mean, so you have that changeover, to Mike's point, of there's just fewer and fewer people that farm more and more acres. And so that's a challenge for rural schools as well, because it affects, those 26 farmsteads used to have kids. That's why the school districts are getting smaller and smaller.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, I'd like to end on a high note with something positive, because there are certainly barriers and challenges that we know exist, but there's good things too. So I'd like to have each of you answer the question, what does the term rural advantage mean to you? And I'll start with Mike Heilman.
Well, I think of a couple of things. One is that sense of family that exists in those small rural schools. We have 30 kids gathered around the flagpole in the morning, and it's 10 below zero, and they're raising the flag, and they're singing the national anthem. And when they head to the door, a couple of little ones fall, and the older kids grab them and scoop them up, and they get them all in the building. There's a real sense of family that exists in these small rural schools, and family takes care of family. So there's a lot of care that is given to the kids that are educated in all of our schools, but I think our rural schools have a real advantage.
Yeah, well said. Mike Bitz.
I'll just echo exactly what Mike said. I grew up in Napoleon. I graduated with 41. And even to this day, when I see any one of them, we know each other. We have a common bond. We support each other. And I just think it's that sense of family that you get from a small school. Even like the teachers in Napoleon, they weren't going to let me fail. I mean, there's no way I was not going to graduate. They were going to take care of me. They were going to call my parents if they needed to, but they were in my corner.
That's well said as well. And Brant, I'll round it out with you.
Yes, absolutely. Not only, classmates know each other well, but the teachers know all the students very well. I mean, rural advantage is that you have the teachers have the same kids for 5-6 years in a row. And so they get to really know them. I still maintain that my experience in a rural school was just such an advantage because I got to know these teachers. They got to know me. And I learned so much from them. And I still appreciate, every once in a while you get an opportunity to say thank you. And because there is that advantage because you know them well enough. It isn't like you just have them 1 year or one class or one semester. You get to know them. And the community support. I mean, nothing better than a Friday night in the fall with football. The community comes out, or Friday night in December and January at the basketball court. And that's the rural advantage because the school is the center of the community. And that's the advantage. They appreciate the kids and they support in so many ways. And so that's the rural advantage.
Yeah, well said. Wow, 3 great answers. Well, I want to thank you, all 3 of you, for spending some time with me today and the different lenses that you brought to the conversation around what you're doing in North Dakota. Hey, the work that NDSOS is doing is not abstract. It really is showing up in communities that want to keep their schools strong and their students with opportunities in front of them and making sure that rural leaders can build stability without being punished for geography. So thank you for spending the time with me today, and thank you for what you do for North Dakota.
Thank you.
You.
Well, friends, if this conversation sharpened something for you, then carry it into your next leadership conversation. Small schools are not a side story. They really are the backbone in places like North Dakota and in so many other states. If the Rural Scoop is helping you lead with clarity and courage, please like the episode and make sure that you're subscribed to the show. Leave a comment with your takeaway and share this episode with a colleague who also leads in a rural community because those help signal other leaders to find us. I'm your host, Melissa Sadorf, and remember, in rural leadership, our strength is our shared story. When we lead together, we thrive together. I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Rural Scoop. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep these important rural conversations going. And we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave a comment or share your thoughts. You can follow along and never miss a new release by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or by following us on social. We're on YouTube at The Rural Scoop, Instagram at msadorf1, and X at msadorf03. The Rural Scoop is produced with support from 𝐏𝐤a Educational Consultants. To learn more, visit 𝐏𝐤aconsultants.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education. And as always, keep leaning in to the rural advantage.